thank you so much for joining us. It's such a treat to see everybody. We are in for a treat this evening. We've got some incredible speakers. My name is Nancy Nyland. I'm the Volunteer and Special Events Coordinator for Lake Oswego Reads. Thank you for joining us for a Lake Oswego Reads event. We would not be able to put on Lake Oswego Reads without our credible sponsors. Friends of the Lake Oswego Library who also gave us the cookies tonight, so thank you, friends. The City of Lake Oswego Rotary, the Lakewood Center, and of course, the Lake Oswego Review. I don't believe we have any board directors from the Friends tonight, but if you feel like becoming a member of the Friends, we've got their membership forms in the back, and everything that they do is for the library, for events, books for babies, anything that we have going on that is above and beyond books and materials. The Friends are paying for it, so it's a great group to join. I would like to remind everyone to silence their cell phones. Thank you. And I'd like to introduce, first, J. Brian Monihan is a veteran Oregon newspaper editor and president of the Pamplin Media Group and publisher of the Portland Tribune. In addition, Monihan currently serves as publisher of 6 additional newspapers and websites. So I'm very grateful that you're here this evening because I know you're a busy guy. He has worked for the media company for 35 years. So clearly he took it up when he was about 6 years old and had a student there. Monihan grew up in Beaverton. He is a graduate of Jesuit High School and Oregon State University. He and his lovely, lovely wife, Tracy, have 5 children. So he's a busy guy. And next we have Patrick Malee, is a Portland-based journalist who originally hails from Chicago. He is the editor of the Lake Oswego Review and has won a number of awards for writing, photography, and headline writing. Please join me in welcoming Brian Monihan and Patrick Malee as they discuss ethics and objectivity in journalism.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. I know some of your faces and some of you I don't know, but we really appreciate all of you being here tonight to talk with us about one of our favorite subjects, and one that is obviously very integral to the book that everybody read for Lake Oswego Reads this year. And so we are going to have a short presentation, and then we are going to try to open up for discussion and questions that anybody might have or comments. The idea being hopefully to spend more time talking with each other than you having to listen to me give this presentation. But hopefully it will be a little bit illuminating on some of the kind of the basics that go around journalism, and specifically the ethics and objectivity that really come into play a lot in this book in particular. So we will get started. And we're going to start with something very basic, which is, what is objectivity? And we're going to just define it as, with most dictionaries will define it as expressing or using facts without distortion or personal beliefs, bias, feelings, or prejudice. And obviously that's something that comes into play in pretty much everything that we do on a day-to-day basis in our world, the newspaper world, and journalism at large. So what does this mean in the journalism context? And I have a few quotes that I'm going to share because I think other people can explain this even better than I can. And you'll have to excuse me, it's a little hard for me to see from this angle. I've got it right in front of me. Objectivity called for journalists to develop a consistent method of testing information, a transparent approach to evidence, precisely so that personal and cultural biases would not undermine the accuracy of their work. And that is from The Elements of Journalism, which I'm pretty sure I read in college at some point. And then here we have a quote from Sally Busby, who is the current executive editor of the Washington Post. And she says, "There is some confusion about the value of good reporting versus point of view. We stress the value of reporting, what you were able to dig up, so that you, the reader, can make up your own mind." And so we're going to look a little bit at the origin of the idea of objectivity in journalism, because it's actually somewhat recent that this became kind of a focal point. A lot of early journalism was, really just kind of passing messages along and not really focused so much on the idea of objectivity. And it was in sometime kind of in the 1920s, specifically 1920, when really famous journalist Walter Lippmann published a book called Liberty and News. And in the book, he wrote that there is everywhere an increasingly angry disillusionment about the press, a growing sense of being baffled and misled. The cardinal fact is the loss of contact with objective information. I found this in a 2023 article in the Washington Post that was covering the idea of objectivity, and they pointed out, which I also noticed when reading this, how relevant this quote is for the times that we're living in right now. It's kind of a reminder that all across history there have been times of a lot of division, and that is what kind of caused objectivity to come into play in journalism to try to combat that. And further, Lippmann wrote that without standards of evidence, without criteria of emphasis, the living substance of all popular decision is exposed to every prejudice and to infinite exploitation. And so he really kind of laid the foundation in a lot of ways for journalists going forward to try to strive for objectivity. Of course, over time, this evolved, the idea around it, and specifically another Washington Post editor, Leonard Downey Jr., he wrote that I never understood what objectivity meant. I didn't consider it a standard for our newsroom. My goals for our journalism were instead accuracy, fairness, nonpartisanship, accountability, and the pursuit of truth. And today there's actually been a lot of modern pushback to the idea of objectivity and what that really means in journalism. This is, I think, kind of a natural progression of things, especially in the last decade or so, when there've been, a lot of big, issues, divisive issues that have come up all across the world that have people wondering, about the whole idea of, presenting both sides and what is fact and, what really needs to be presented in a journalistic context. And the idea of, both sides when one side is really not a fact. And so there have been people like Kathleen Carroll, the former executive editor of the Associated Press, who said, "It's objective by whose standard? That standard seems to be white, educated, fairly wealthy. And when people don't feel like they find themselves in news coverage, it's because they don't fit that definition." So there's a lot of the pushback is, as you see here, kind of surrounds the idea of inclusivity and who really defines what it means to be objective in reporting. And an even stronger position from Emilio Garcia Ruiz, the San Francisco Chronicle editor-in-chief, is that the consensus among younger journalists is we got it all wrong. Objectivity has got to go. And these were both in the same article that I cited earlier in the Washington Post about objectivity in journalism and how important it or not important it is. So in the book that everybody read, Honor, objectivity comes into play in a lot of different ways. Specifically, the protagonist, Smita, is pulled into reporting a story that she can really relate to on a very personal level. And we see this at first just in the fact that she's returned to the country that she grew up in until she was a teenager. And she's, has a lot of conflicted feelings about it and has to report a story that is, that feels very raw to her, just because of all the kind of conflicted feelings she has about her home country or the country she grew up in. Later, it becomes apparent that it's an even more personal connection that she has to this story that she's reporting about a woman whose husband was murdered by her brothers, And it has to do with religious strife, and we learned that that she's Muslim, and that she has kind of even more of a connection to the religious division that caused this incident that she has to report on. And so she faces a lot of conflict and kind of questions, how you can report on something like that. And it's really challenging for her throughout the story. And the author, in an interview with us that we actually I don't think have published in print yet, saving it, but it's been online. She told us that I never absolutely resolved this question for myself. So I did a sneaky thing. I took an issue I couldn't resolve for myself, and I threw it at poor Smita and gave her the same struggle. Because this author was a journalist herself, and so this was obviously something that she had a lot of experience in, and kind of explored that experience through this protagonist. So now we get to us and how we approach this, and so we really, both Brian and I, we face challenges and questions related to objectivity. I say just about, but really literally every day, and almost every story that we do, we're constantly, that's at the top of mind in terms of how we can be as truthful as possible, as fair as possible, and sort of similar to what one of the quotes was talking about. I don't necessarily, the word objectivity isn't always at the top of my mind, but what it defines, I think, is, and that's just telling as close to the very truth of everything as we can, and being as fair and representative of everybody in the community as we can, and that can be really challenging, and we do our best, but sometimes we do fall short, and try to learn from those experiences and keep getting better. And so obviously our goal is to be as fair and comprehensive and truthful as possible. And like newsrooms large and small throughout the nation, as we've seen in some of the quotes that were presented earlier, we're always evaluating the true meaning and utility of objectivity. I personally wouldn't go as far as to say as what the gentleman from the San Francisco Chronicle said about the approach being wrong. But I have found over these recent years, when people in my profession have been really questioning that, it definitely prompts me to ask questions and really try to evaluate how best to serve all of you, and really just be as truthful and honest as we can be about every story that we cover. And really a good example of how these challenges come into play in really big and small ways can be seen actually in this cover, because I remember when we put this out, I got a call from somebody who was upset about how we featured the Lake Ridge boys soccer team winning a state title, which is a big deal. But at the same time, around that same time, I believe it was the girls water polo team also won a state title, and I had just somehow not thought through that they deserve to have equal play, just like the boys soccer team did. And that was a really good example of kind of an honest mistake on my part, but definitely something that I felt bad about, and didn't, I'm sure in that person's eyes who called me, it seemed like we were favoring one school or the boys over the girls, and that can I would definitely understand how that would come across. It wasn't my intention, but definitely was a learning experience, and that those types of things come into play all the time. Brian and I were talking about how especially with the high school rivalry, we're I think Brian probably has even more experiences with this than I do over the years of people thinking we favor one school over the other, and so we're always trying to be conscious of that too, and making sure we're as objective and fair to both schools as we can be. And so this was also going to be the time that I passed the mic over to Brian to kind of ask you. She knows too. I was just going to, and I just wanted to ask you sort of for a little bit of your perspective on what I was just talking about in terms of how we approach this in our newsrooms over the years.
Sure. Yeah, and just to clarify, Patrick as the editor has the hardest job of anybody in the company, I think, because he has to deal with all the questions about why did my letter get published here? Why didn't it? Or why did you publish that story? As a publisher, I stick to the business side. My job is hard as well, but my job is to make sure we're bringing in the money to keep the papers going and making sure that if Patrick has a question, I can try to chime in. But the editors are the one that has to make those hard objective calls in terms of, I guess Patrick noted, are we being fair with our coverage? And as he noted, over the years, I've taken those calls from angry parents about, how come you're only featuring Lake Oswego on the front? Or how come Lake Ridge didn't get played up this week? And we got to the point where we were actually measuring the length of every story you wrote for each school, counted the number of stories, and as we could go back and confidently report, hey, over the course of the season, we've done this many about Lake Ridge, this many about Lake Oswego. Same is true with political letters to the editor. We get a record number of letters to the editor compared to all our publications in the Lake Oswego Review, which says great things about this community and how involved they are. But everybody's always very concerned about where does their letter fall in the order of the newspaper. So we set a rule that, we would put the letters in by the date and the time they arrived. It made it a little harder versus when it went all digital per se, and we're getting it that way. But in some weeks we had 60 or 70 letters to the editor. People were always accusing us of publishing only the good letters in the front and the letters about candidates we didn't like in the back of the paper, which is never the case. So it really is the perspective of the person who's talking to us is always, they're not as always objective as we would hope. And as Patrick noted, our goal is always just to be fair. And I had one editor tell me one time, Brian, you're not doing your job unless you're making somebody angry. And that's the thing. It's kind of a no-win a lot of times in terms of our role in the community is to cover the news. And sometimes it's going to be, most of the time it's going to be positive news, but a lot of times it can be negative news. And that's not the kind of news we like. We definitely don't like to put out those negative stories. People accuse us of, that's what sells newspapers. Well, it doesn't. People do like that news, but it doesn't put a lot of more money in our pocket by any means. And so for us, it's kind of why I like our publications and community journalism, because most people don't get upset about running stories about high school kids or a couple weeks ago, we did Amazing Educators. Everybody loves teachers, from their standpoint. A couple weeks, we're doing Amazing Kids. It's those stories we can tell about people in our community who are doing awesome things and making our community better. That's the kind of journalism I love, and I love it when we can be more of a community cheerleader to create stronger communities through our stories, create engagement, like through LO Reads. I remember, what year is this for LO Reads? 18. So 19 years ago, I remember when Cindy Glazer came to me and said, Brian, we have an idea. Would the review help us? And so she rolled out this idea for LO Reads, and to be honest, I got it, but I had no clue it would be as big as it is today. So kudos to Bill Bars and Cindy who brought this to fruition, and for Nancy to keeping it going, and the community as a whole. This is really something special that this community puts together. For the paper to be part of that, I think is huge. And that's why I think when you come to any event you typically see in the city, my goal is always that the Lake Oswego Review is front and center in terms of one of the key sponsors, because again, if we can bring people together as a community, it makes us all stronger, and hopefully we can do that through our journalism. But in terms of being objective, again, it's a difficult road, and sometimes we're going to get it right, and sometimes we're not. But my hope is always the fact that you can call Patrick on the phone, or you can find me somewhere around town. I'm willing to answer the phone if I can get to it. Sometimes I've got phones stacked up or messages stacked up, but I always get the comment, oh, I didn't think anybody would pick up the phone, right? I didn't think anybody would respond. I like to think of us as a little different kind of media. I don't like to see us as bigger dailies or whatever. I mean, I like to be the more personal media that's ingrained in the community, because if somebody's angry at me, they might see me at a school event. They might see me walking in a park, might see me at a concert, and I got to be accountable for that. And I want to be able to hold my head up high, just like Patrick does, in terms of feeling good. It's our names on these papers. It's Dr. Pamplin's name on these papers. It's our own integrity. And so by making sure that we're doing the best job we can, which again, You know, it's not an easy job to always make everybody happy, and we know we can't, but we try to do our best, and our reporters work really hard to just be fair and balanced in what we cover. Anything to add to that?
No, I think Brian covered that well. These questions come up, in smaller ways, like Brian mentioned, in where letters get placed, and then in some really, these really big ways, that we report some, complex and sometimes upsetting stories.
The Malee case.
Yeah, I mean, in West Lynn, where I also work as the editor, there has been a very complex case involving a former doctor who was accused by hundreds of his former patients of sexual abuse when they were in his care, and we've been reporting on that. Our reporter Holly Bartholomew has been reporting on that for I think about 4 years now. And I think doing a really incredible job of trying to be as objective and fair to everybody involved as as things have evolved into a lot of different complex areas, and really trying to tell the story as best as we can, and be fair to everybody, which we haven't always. In some people's eyes, we haven't always succeeded in, particularly with that story. We've gotten some angry emails and phone calls, and had some people upset with us. But it's all in the in the service of trying to tell important stories in the most fair and accurate way that we really can. That's just one example. There's a lot of examples here locally in Lake Oswego, and I think this really comes into play specifically, and this is something that Brian touched on a little bit in local journalism, because we do have connections in the community. I see people, and I know who people know who we are. And we care about the community, so we have a stake too in making sure that we're representing the city, the people of the city, and telling their stories correctly. And so it's really, really important to us, and we're always striving to improve that. And with that, we will move to questions and comments, and hopefully hear from a lot of you, and happy to answer any questions.
And I'll be the runner. Probably don't read this, because as a former teacher, I can there's this. I was struck by something you said, Patrick, about, I think it was the San Francisco Chronicle, whatever, and that maybe younger journalists don't think that objectivity is something that they need to worry about, or did I hear that incorrectly? So repeat the question.
Sure. So the question was about the quote that I shared, and let me see if I can go back to that real quick so that people can see it. But it had to do with the idea that objectivity no longer matters. So yeah, the quote, I'll just read it again real quick, is: "The consensus among younger journalists is we got it all wrong. Objectivity has got to go." And this was just one quote that I found. It did strike me, and I think in my experience, I think this quote is being maybe a little bit definitive in something that I think is very complex. And I think what it's getting at is that a lot of younger journalists and specifically journalists who haven't had as many opportunities historically to be part of the industry, people of color, members of the LGBTQ plus communities, and other marginalized communities, I think have really been historically very underrepresented in as reporters, as editors, and then as a result in the journalism that is produced. And I think this is the pushback from their point of view is that being objective and the idea of telling both sides in a story can be harmful in really situations that are that can be dangerous or could actually harm them in some way if they're already feeling marginalized. And so I think that's really where that perspective comes from. And what I would say, if I were to respond to that quote, is that I don't think that we got it all wrong. I think that there's definitely there should be a middle ground in some way, and a better way to try to present what you would call objective reporting in a more inclusive way. That doesn't mean that everything, the whole model is broken. I would disagree with that, but I hope that helps answer a little bit.
Very. One thing that makes media in general today so much harder is the fact that people get their news and information from so many different sources, and I try to swing back on radio or TV to see how different entities or companies are reporting. So if I'm listening to OPB and I switch over to KXL, Lars Larson is going to give a totally different take on something compared to what OPB did. And then even going from CNN to Fox or CNBC, it's always kind of a exciting or a treat, I don't know, to see how they're going to report whatever. And so it makes readers or just the general public, it makes their job so much harder to figure out what's truthful. I would debate my sister-in-law about the importance of getting a COVID shot. She just didn't think that was the safest thing to do, and she was citing all these sources, and they were all doctors, and I would be looking up these sources and saying, "Hey, Lindsay, this is saying it's not a factual person, and they're just spreading rumors and innuendos." But she was so ingrained with her group of people, it was all tunnel vision in terms of what they're hearing collectively together. She didn't believe me, even though I was saying it's not the media who's behind pumping all this stuff out. But that makes it so much harder in today's world in terms of just bringing people together, because people have too many sources. And so it really is up to people to do their due diligence when it comes to everything in terms of what they're responding to, especially elections. I see Jeff Goodman here, who's running for state treasurer. I'm sure there's probably some other candidates here. But do your homework in terms of who's running. Don't just believe what you see on the TV blurps. Don't just believe what's on their website. Try to go to some legitimate sources to source whatever you're looking up and get a variety of opinions before you make your decision. But that's the hardest thing.
So we're using the microphone so that the edited version of this presentation can be heard by everyone. Play your questions.
Well, my question is, how do you find the source? That's the trouble for me.
Yeah. I know what I do is, I think it goes back to name recognition. I mean, it also depends on your faith in some of the higher media companies. So if you see a name of a media company you recognize, if you feel that they've provided objective, fair journalism, I would kind of trust that more than I would. There's so many fake sites and fake news sources that sound like a legitimate source, but they're not. And they're typically paid by one side or one group to get their point across. And it's very confusing for people. And it makes it really hard. I was working with a gentleman who, at St. Helens, who wanted to get a letter to the editor in one of our publications. And I happened to answer the phone. I kind of wish I hadn't, but I did. And so I was trying to help this gentleman. He was a veteran from Vietnam. My dad's a Vietnam veteran, so I had a kinship wanted to help him out. But he was very concerned about a Chinese company coming into St. Helens. He wrote a very long letter to the editor explaining why China is not in support of the U.S. and laid out 5 or 6 examples of how dangerous it was to do anything with China. 4 or 5 of them were purely stuff that was just not factual. It was spreading more gossip, and so I was trying to coach him through what we could put in the paper, because we didn't want to spread lies or stuff that wasn't factual compared to what he had heard on Fox or somewhere else. So in his mind, I couldn't convince him any differently, but I was able to convince him we're not going to just put stuff out there we couldn't validate. And it's hard with a letter to the editor, but we still don't want to put things out there that aren't truthful. I mean, you can probably respond to that because you deal with us all the time.
Yeah, what I would add to that is, and it is very difficult to, I mean, media literacy, even for people who are in the industry, is I think more difficult than ever. And I think to Brian's point, finding sources that you feel you can trust based on really evaluating them and whether they were providing what you perceive to be accurate information, and then going back to those sources. And if they're not, then interrogating them, calling the editor and asking, where did you get this information? And really, you really do have to kind of do some work yourself, unfortunately, to really determine if you can trust your news source. We understand that, and I'm always happy to try to explain as best as I can how our reporting works and how we try to fact check and do things like that. Another thing that I think can be helpful in interrogating other news sources that you don't feel as strong in your trust and your kind of questioning is, honestly, one great thing we have nowadays is Google. And if you see something that seems strange and you put it in Google, like a quote, or you see a person who's a supposed expert on something, and you can put it in Google, and in 2 seconds you can kind of figure out, is this a legit person or not, based on whether they turn up as an actual person. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fake people on the internet nowadays too. So you can really Google is a really, it's a you can fall into a rabbit hole with Googling things, but if you're really just looking for confirmation that someone's a real person, has a real degree or anything like that, you can find a lot just with a simple search. And so if you see something in a story that you think is fishy, and you're wondering if this doctor is really a doctor, you'd be surprised how quickly you can kind of suss that out.
The other thing about Google, there's lots of fact-checking websites, and I would check multiple of those as well. So don't just always trust the first source you see in Google.
No, certainly not.
Yeah. Go for a couple.
I didn't want to imply that, but it can be a good start-off point.
This question is for both of you. Do you use AI at all in your news?
I'll let Patrick go first, then I'll confess.
I think the answer to that is complex. I've been thinking a lot about this, and I'm not dodging your question. I can tell you, I have never once actually used ChatGPT as an example. I'm resisting that whole phenomenon, whatever you would call it. And I am fearful of what AI could, do to our industry in particular. But when you really think about it, I've thought about this, and literally what I just said, Google is in a lot of ways you could classify as artificial intelligence. You can put a question in there and it gives you an answer, just like ChatGPT does. Although I think ChatGPT just does it a little more creepily in terms of acting like a real person. But so I think the answer is complex because we do we use the internet. We're on the internet and we're trying to we are doing quick searches or calculations and things. So in that sense we do, but I certainly would draw the line at asking AI to putting a press release into AI and saying, write a story for me. I would personally never ever do that. And it scares me that is happening in some other journalistic corners. And so I feel pretty strongly about not doing that.
Yeah, and it really depends on how media companies are using it. Oregonian uses it for, if you've seen those posts on social media about top 10 most expensive homes in Lake Oswego that were just sold. So they're using AI to pull that information out of the RLMLS and generating those posts off of it. Other media companies are using it and then actually sourcing it when they publish those stories. And to Patrick's point, it is very scary. And I know newspapers are not, well staffed as they have in the past. They're looking for any opportunity to save time and generate more stories if they can do that. So it's definitely a topic. We're having a topic at our publishers convention this summer to talk about how that's done. And just me personally, I did cheat in terms of I did not read this book yet. But to prepare for this, I did throw that in ChatGPT. It was like the second or third thing I've ever done in ChatGPT, but I was astonished when I asked about objectivity through the book, about the book Honor, how did it relate to the main characters. It gave me a synopsis in 10 seconds, and it was quite shocking. So
I did read the book, though.
Well, that's why he's talking about it, and I didn't.
Sure, no problem. I want to challenge you, Brian, that you say bad news doesn't sell. I'll give you an example. I was just really curious about it. National newspaper, digital, and all I did was count the headlines. I counted the number of stories that were positive stroke neutral and the number of stories that were negative stories. Yeah, pretty easy to tell. It was 30%, 70%. Now, if I were to just look at that statistics, I would say life's pretty bad. But I think that's not the case. So my view is that actually, and I'm not saying you do that here, but my view is that indeed bad news does sell. And that's what they hit us with. And when we see that, it's very difficult. And they will present things that are facts, but they're actually opinions. That's my personal view. I'm just curious what you think.
Yeah. And when I brought that point up, I was really talking more about how we treat it. Compared to, you look at Fox 12, all they do is follow what the place blotter is, and that's exactly what you're going to see in terms of news coverage. To your point, we do know that we run a negative story. Web traffic increases. Do I make any money off it personally or the company? Not really. And the same is true with just, the number of papers you might sell off of it. But for yes, the national media, it's pretty obvious when you're looking at TV that they do lead with all the stuff because, again, it's human nature for people to want to know that. I used to track our rack sales in each of our communities, or in my communities, I was a publisher, depending on if there's a big weather event or a horrible story, what did the sales of the newspapers do that week? And this was 20 years ago. And at that point, yeah, we did sell 100 more papers. We made an extra $25 that week. But the real point is that, again, people do like that stuff, but for us, it's more of a balance. And again, 90% of the stuff you're going to see out of our publications is going to be more, I think, more positive. But, we don't want to be the publications that just chase that bad news. So.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I enjoyed the book very much and wondering what your opinion might be, ethically speaking, as to whether Smithers should have deferred the story to someone who wasn't as emotionally attached or passionate about what happened based on her experience. If you as a journalist had an experience close to what was happening, would it be more, you would be more likely to be less biased if you hadn't had a similar experience? Wondering what your opinion is as to whether Smithers should have deferred the story to someone else. Yeah.
Let me give that to Patrick.
Person who read the book.
Then I can weigh in person. Then I got to weigh in personally. Yeah.
I think that that question really gets at a lot of what we were talking about with the pushback nowadays about objectivity and what that even really means and who is allowed to tell what stories. And if you have too much of a connection to something, does that impact the way that you tell the story? And I think you could certainly argue that Smita had too much of a connection to the story, and I think a lot of particularly older generations of journalists and editors would have said absolutely not. You can't you can't do that story. I come out feeling a little bit ambivalent. I think it really is something that, that it, for one, that's part of why editors exist. It's something that, really needs to be talked through. I was struck a little bit reading in the early going of this, of the book, when she's taking on the story. There's really not much of a presence of an editor. And I felt like, it seemed to me a little, I don't want to say unrealistic, but I was thinking, I would think she'd be in more frequent contact with her editor about, how to approach the story, what was happening, and then having those really, difficult conversations about, am I too close to this? And can I do this effectively? Ultimately, I think that it really is almost a person by person thing. And I don't think that your personal experiences should bar you from reporting a story if you can do it if you can do your job in the most ethical way possible, and put some of your personal experiences to the side. I mean, we really are tasked to do that in a lot of ways, and talking to people that we may disagree with, or have personal experiences with that were unpleasant, and still do our jobs. That's sort of what journalists do. So I think that if you're really good at what you do, and you have a personal experience like that, you can still do your job effectively. And so I would come out on the side that, having, if I was the editor and I had, talked this through with her, I think I would come out on the side of allowing her to do the story, and then deciding at the end, are you too close to this? Or, maybe, and looking at the work, and is it fair, and is it accurate from my perspective, which, if I was the editor, I would be more, probably a little less close to the situation. So it's really, it's a team effort. And in the end, I think I would side towards, allowing her to report out the story, and hopefully do an effective job with it, even though there is a lot of, personal connection to it.
Okay. But
Are you going to continue to do a hard copy of the paper? My paper arrives in my mailbox every Wednesday. It makes me very happy because I read other papers online. But are we going to continue to have a hard copy of the paper, or is that going to go by the by? Yeah.
I think Brian will want to answer that first.
Yeah, that's my question. And I agree with you. I think we'll always have some form of printed newspaper. There's always a segment of the population who likes to hold the paper in their hands. Our challenge is really comes back to two things. We need more advertising to support the work we do, not just the cost of printing a newspaper, but every time we send a reporter out to cover an event, it's $250. That's our cost to pay for that person, to print that story, to distribute it through the mail. And so we used to have 100 reporters at Pamplin Media. I have 50 now. And so our challenge is to figure out how to find that baseline where we can continue to invest in our company, hire more reporters, and keep that print product going. The thing about the print product, which makes it even more valuable, is that it pays for 90% of our expenses. Digital does not cut the beans whatsoever. And digital revenue, even though digital readership is going up, the revenue associated with digital media is going down. And so most people don't understand that, but that's the reality in terms of what advertisers are willing to pay for it. And so we can't make up. If we lose 10 print subscribers, we've got to sell like 200 digital subscribers just to make up for those 10. So the numbers just don't work on the digital. And that's why digital media, there's been so many things, and I think media in general follows these big trends and they jump on the next bandwagon. Well, the reality is a lot of digital companies are actually cutting back or shutting down because they just can't make it on the media side. And so media as a whole is trying to figure out, okay, where are we going? And nobody has figured it out throughout the country, except maybe the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. They've got, they're the big dogs, and they've got millions of subscribers digitally that can pay the bills. But from the Oregonian to a lot of other dailies, even our weeklies around the state, I can tell you, all media is trying to figure out where do we go. The printed papers we want to keep.
Switched from Thursday to Wednesday. We did that was 5 years ago.
Yes,
And I like that. I like Wednesday back to the
good to know.
Good to hear.
One and a half proofs.
Yep.
So we're all going to be purchasing subscriptions. And yes, I One hands might be a set.
This is for you, Patrick, because you read the book. There's a part where Smita goes to the village to Abreu and the mother-in-law and Mina, and she sees what a terrible mess they're in. And Mohan gives food and stuff. She is angry with him. And it seems like, you're losing some of your humanity by calling it objectivity. So I want to know how much you reflect on that.
Yeah, it's funny you bring that up because I was really thinking a lot about that too. I think she even says like on a technical level, you really can't, she herself, I think they even have a discussion like you can technically give it to her, but I can't. Because, technically really, if someone's a source, you can't be giving them things. I think the reason that is a rule in journalism is more so, for more nefarious reasons than that particular example. Like if you were to, just straight up pay somebody a lot of money to give you a juicy interview, in Hollywood or something. But I think that one of the reasons the book works well is because it really, and when you read it as a journalist, makes you think a lot is because, like you said, how do you weigh being a journalist versus just being a human being, and trying to just help people. And I don't know, I don't really know I would say that, in the end, who's it really hurting, to give them a few things that they might need. And I don't think it really impacts the ability to tell a truthful story. So, I would probably understand more, them choosing to do that, much more so than other instances when journalists cross the line and kind of give something to a source that they have that is going to completely change the dynamic of the story being told. But it's a really complex question, and I truthfully don't have I don't know the right answer. I go back and forth. And I think in that situation, I would want to help people first, but then, if someone said that made me less of a objective journalist, it would be, I'd have to really consider that. So, I don't think I have the right answer. And I think that's why it's effective in the book.
Sort of maybe related to that. So, and to what she was reporting, there is reporting facts, whatever the facts are of what happened, and then there are reporting opinions or viewpoints of your perceptions of what happened. Are those appropriate in the same article, or should one be, I'm presenting the facts, these are what the facts are, and then somewhere else in an editorial or something, should those opinions, or do you combine them in the same article?
No, it's in Ruth Clifton.
My preference is to separate them. I have seen stories that have somehow towed the line well between kind of interjecting the writer's voice and some of their opinions and the story itself, but I think it's really difficult to pull that off and not have the reader start to feel a little distracted and wondering what it is exactly that they're reading, whether it's an opinion piece or just straight, journalism. So I think, it particularly in a publication like ours, where there's an opinion section, we write editorials, there's a space to do that and almost package it so that, you can have the story, let people read that, and just kind of present everything as factually as you can, and then weigh in on those facts in a very transparent way in, an opinion piece. So that would be my preference. Like I said, I have seen some very skilled journalists kind of toe the line, but it's very difficult to do that effectively.
One thing that makes it harder with the digital age is the fact that opinion pieces come across somebody's computer or their sheet and they see it as a news story and not as an opinion piece. And so we get called out on that all the time, where people just angry about something appearing in the newspaper, and we have to explain to them, well, that's an opinion piece that they submitted based on it's a letter to the editor. It's not an actual news story. And even if it's clearly there in print, it's so easy to miss sometimes. So that makes it even more challenging in terms of people not fully understanding. I had a gentleman who he was actually picketing in front of our corporate office. He was with the Proud Boys. He was angry that we had accepted a letter from somebody who had talked about their experience being confronted with the Proud Boys, and he was angry that we had printed it, so he was going to take it out on us by picketing in front of our office throughout the summer, taking pictures of our employees, creating all kinds of havoc. And when we tried to talk him through it, he said, well, you guys make up everything all the time. Well, why do you even care? And it was very disappointing.
Good work.
If there are no other questions, let's give a huge round of applause.
Oh.
As a big piece of